without further ado, here we go. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone. I have with me a repeat guest this time who I'm super excited about. My friend Hillary is back with us. Hillary, just because maybe people didn't listen to our awesome Pride and Prejudice episode, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and maybe how we know each other?
Sure. I'm going on my 10th year of being a children's librarian, which is bananas. So I
Indeed.
would like to think that I'm fairly qualified to talk about children's books and them being adapted to movies.
Indeed, the most.
The most. So knowledgeable. And we met in college. It was definitely like freshman hallway situation down the
That's
hall
so
and around the
crazy.
corner. But then after that, we
was-
became psych buddies.
We did. That is such a weird, fun, random show that you either really know or you really don't. There's so
She'll
many
just
weird things that happen on that show.
Yes.
So
So many
weird
good things,
things.
though. So quotable. And now,
Yes.
you know, whenever you rewatch certain episodes of Psych, Dule Hill is also in Holes, and now those jokes make sense.
They
They
just
do.
all
That movie. Want me to go with you to awkward class?
there was so much about Psych, Dule, and Dule is
Mm-hmm.
here. And then I was like, I forgot, like I knew that because I watched it a long time ago. Then he showed up and I went, oh, I understand why we're talking about this movie. So
I can fix that is
Hill,
my version of As You Wish.
like, that's the most precious nerdy thing I've ever heard anyone say.
Listen,
It's
I
cute.
can fix
It's
that.
cute.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay,
There's
I'll let you fix that. If you can't tell, I was a very hyperactive kid. And so my dad was like, how do I interact with this child? I'll take her to the movies. And so I saw so many movies in theaters, and this was one of them. And I loved it so much that my dad bought me the soundtrack. Holes, Tarzan, Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, all of those. But like these childhood, early 2000s movies always make me think of my dad. I'm like, oh, I remember seeing this in the theaters with my dad.
That's super cool. The nostalgia, or like a movie when you remember the moment when you saw it, I feel definitely sticks.
Right.
It's hard to not just love it, even if you rewatch it and you go, oh no, this is terrible. You're like, I still like it. I have some of those where I really remember the experience of seeing them. And that's why I still love them, not because they're necessarily great. You talked a little bit before we started recording about this, but if you maybe could speak a little bit to what do you feel like as being a fan of the book and the movie, what do you feel like the filmmakers or the cast got really right in this?
Well, one thing that I think is in its favor is the fact that the author also wrote the screenplay. There's a lot of dialogue that's copy pasted. Interestingly enough, I was like, "Oh, let's watch this movie." And then I watched the movie a couple months ago, and then you were like, "Hey, let's do a talk about a movie adaptation." And I was like, "Cool, I need to reread the book and then watch the movie again." It was very much so, yep, I literally remember them saying this in the movie. They did their best to really adapt all of the themes. Obviously, there are things that have to be cut because they don't quite work out in a movie setting, but every choice they made more sense for the movie, but then still stayed true to the book. Probably one of the biggest changes they did was that Stanley Yelnats, the fourth, is supposed to be a very overweight, obese kid. And then
I
he
remember
loses
hearing
weight.
about that, yeah.
He loses weight at camp because he's digging a hole every day and he's burning a lot of energy. They didn't want to do that to a kid, so they just started out with Shia LaBeouf being tiny so that
Who
they
he
didn't
was,
have to make him aggressively
didn't.
lose weight.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like that definitely would make a difference having the same writer because the writer would understand why. So when you're writing something, there's usually a very specific reason that I chose a very specific word to
Right.
put in this particular situation or this particular moment, and you understand how that fits into the whole and why it's important. You understand how that fits into the big picture of the entire piece and that it can mean something if that particular element is left out. I really labored over this line because it was really important. So I need to make sure that I keep true to that. Versus if it's someone else's work, you might not know which ones are going to make or break if you adjust them. I think that really does tend to help because I know there's controversy about this. Obviously, they didn't keep everything, but I feel like the vibe of the Harry Potter movies feels very much true to the meaning and the heart of the
Right.
books. I think that's because she was so involved in everything in a way that makes a difference than if it's when you're making a movie about a book, but the author's no longer with us. And so
Right.
it just has to be everybody doing their best. It doesn't always land. That dialogue piece is huge for me with any movie. If the dialogue is like flat or boring, it's really we're just saying words. We're
Right.
not really piquing my interest at all. There's no variation in the vocabulary. It's just, and
Right.
I feel like
And
that's what books do well. So
every character, like every boy in the D tent, is so vastly different from each other. I like that one thing that is brought up in the books and that you still see in the movie is that X-Ray, who is one of the boys who's got like the really big glasses, he
mm-hmm,
is clearly the leader of the tent, even
mm-hmm,
though he's not the biggest boy at camp.
mm-hmm,
And they did a really good job of like him being like, no, I'm in charge here
mm-hmm. Yeah,
because
that
it's a
is a
juvenile
very,
detention.
yeah, yeah. That's very, I remember thinking that when I was watching it, I was like, oh, okay, there's a
Uh-huh.
hierarchy and he's
Mm-hmm.
at the top and he's going to make sure everyone knows that.
When Stanley got his nickname and he was now Caveman,
Yeah.
he got to move up ahead of Zero. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't last in line anymore. He got to move up.
Yeah, even the giving of the nicknames, which is literally your identifier, is people categorizing you in that way. He was
Mm-hmm.
basically dictating everyone's day by doing that. So
Right.
it's a lot of influence, which I thought was really interesting. They definitely showcased that he was still the one running the show. Were there any particular scenes that really stuck with you from the movie?
There was one thing they changed from book to movie when Sam is killed by the townspeople for kissing the school
Mm.
teacher. In the book, Miss Catherine gets away to him and she's in the boat with him, and the steamboat rams his ship and sinks him. They shoot him in the water, rescue her against her will. In the movie,
Oh,
she runs to the lake yelling his name and they shoot him. She's not in the boat, which I think would be
right.
way more traumatic.
For sure. And also, there's that moment as the viewer, then that you would be watching a woman screaming to be allowed to choose death,
Right.
which would be like, whoa, this is a kid's movie. But oh,
Yeah. It deals with some really heavy topics.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
really heavy. Because even
yeah.
my niece, because I watched it with her, because I was like, I think you'll really like it. At the end, she was like,
Mhm.
it was good, but it was also sad. It was really
Yeah,
kind of sad. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, you thought it was sad? And she was like,
yeah.
yeah.
I've watched movies that I watched growing up with kids that are kids now, and we have learned as adults to access our feelings. I don't think as children we were as allowed to
Right.
or free to be in tune with our feelings inherently, but also definitely through rules and learning the norms and things. Intensity didn't affect us in the same way. We weren't allowed to be sensitively in tune with those things. We had to be a little more like,
Mm-hmm.
keep going. So we just did.
Right.
And then later we're like, wait, what's going on with me? Because I'm an adult
Right.
now and I don't understand. But I do
Right.
think that kids now are more in tune with their feelings, which
For
is a
sure.
good thing. But I do think it can mean that some things are a little much for them
Yeah.
compared to what they might have been for a comparable person back in
Right.
our day, which is interesting. But yeah, definitely some differences in, I think, generationally what maybe is kid appropriate. We talked about the characters already, but I feel one of my questions here was because this is such a big thing with a book, but doesn't always get done very well in movies or TV, the character development. And I feel like
Yeah.
these characters, the ones that we needed, we we get to know what we need to know about everyone.
Right.
There's a lot of people, and we don't maybe
Yes.
necessarily get to hear everyone's full story, but we believe
No.
that they have them and that they're the way they are for a reason.
Right.
In a way that's not throwing anyone away. And you spoke to the hierarchy of the group, and they're all very different, and that's well defined. I feel like, having not, being as familiar with the book and everything, I think that I was able to connect to them and care about them. And that's not always the case, especially with a cast that's got as many people as this one did.
A lot of people, because it's a juvenile detention center, so they're supposed to be troubled. And so you've got the doctor, Pendansky, who they call Mom, who calls all of them by their legal name, except for Zero. He only calls him Zero, which infuriated me so much.
How old were we when this movie came out?
Let me check real fast.
That's okay. I forgot also. We weren't like high
No,
school.
it came out in 2003, so I was 11.
Okay, so I was 12, and I remember being like, why doesn't that man call that boy by his name?
Right.
And I never for a second thought someone's mom named that kid Zero.
No.
I thought, why is that? Because that's what Stanley thought. He calls everyone by their legal name. That must be his legal name. And I thought,
right.
No, moms don't do that.
No.
12-year-old Lyndsey was like, no, this guy's being a jerk to this kid, and I don't understand why, but I'm not happy about it. I was very mad on behalf of this kid for not being treated by that guy the same way. I was like, that's not fair. That's not nice. And he just treats him like he's too dumb. And I'm like, he doesn't seem dumb. He seems like he's choosing not to. Little justice minded me was very much like, hold on a second. Why isn't anyone fixing this? Like, why isn't anyone standing up for this tiny kid? I just was so mad about it.
Oh, it's infuriating. It's infuriating reading the book. The dialogue and the characterization, especially between Pendansky and Hector Zeroni Zero, is really well done. You just see him be antagonized the whole book, the whole movie, and then be like, no, I'm teaching him how to read. And he's like, he's so stupid, he doesn't even know he's stupid. Spell dog, like DOG. And then one of the words is hat. He's spell HAT. And Stanley thinks to himself, oh crap, we haven't gone over H sounds yet. In the book, he thinks it's chat because HAT. And then all of the grown-ups laugh at him because he says the wrong word.
So
and then he's DIG, what's that spell? And that's when he hits him in the face with the shovel and runs off. And I'm like, that's right. Get him in the face. Oh, it's infuriating.
Oh my gosh. No, and it's also one of those things where the people put in these positions and the structure of these systems is just so, I mean, we could go big picture and really argue about the justice system at large. But even if you go all the way down to just juvenile justice, like these kids are behaving this extreme way because they are not getting some kind of resource that they need. It should be about that.
At the very beginning of the movie, Barfbag, some boy whose name we never find out, he purposefully sticks his foot out to get bit by a rattlesnake because he can't stand camp. It's a terrible place.
I might die, but I'll take that.
I'll get sent to the hospital and I'll be free. I won't be here anymore. Because you hear all the other kids go, no, Barfbag, it's not that bad. Don't do it, man. And then that's how Stanley can go to Camp Green Lake, because there's a spot that's open because some kid decided that physical harm was better than being where he was, because it's clearly not a well-regulated juvenile detention center.
No, not at all.
When the State Department finally comes, after Stanley's luck has broken when he defeats the curse, which we haven't even gone over, because there's a lot that happens in this movie.
We'll get there.
His curse is broken, and then his family can afford a lawyer because he's too poor to afford a lawyer, so he just represents himself in court.
Yeah, can we talk about court for a second, though?
Sure.
In what universe?
Right.
Is a judge that maliciously against a white male child?
There's nothing else happening.
But like
they don't have any other suspects, and all of the circumstantial
but
evidence
he's
is pretty
but
strong.
he's so wants him to get the worst. He's just like against this kid. I'm not saying that the kid
Right.
shouldn't and probably wasn't going to be found guilty. That's what it is. But this guy's positioning and attitude was so like, I want you to have the worst of the worst. I want it over shoes.
I think the movie does a fairly good job. We also have to remember that in the book, yes, he's a white boy, but he's also a fat, poor white boy.
Okay. Yeah.
And then very well known baseball player who was homeless, and he grew up in that shelter where he donated those shoes to raise money for the shelter. So you've got a high level athlete who is very emotionally connected to what's happening to this shelter. And he's, oh, this boy who says he's my fan stole my shoes. So I think the
Yeah.
layers, like, it's not good. This book and this movie are
No.
clearly a critique of juvenile justice
Sure.
and the systems
Sure.
that we have in place and the
Yeah.
people that we put in charge of our children.
The way we think we're fixing a problem,
Right?
honestly.
The bad boy and make him dig
Or
holes and he becomes a good boy. Quote from the
or
book and the movie.
but even the assessment of what the problem is, I think.
Yeah,
The, the problem was what led to the law being broken.
right.
And that is not how we, in the way of kids, there's a lot of developing still happening.
You're not fully developed until you're 25.
No, which is insane.
Right.
So,
And when you get to the end of the movie, spoiler, but it's been out since '03, you find out that Zero was the one who stole the shoes because he needed shoes on his feet. He was a homeless boy who couldn't find his mom. His mom left him in a park and they lost each other. So he needed shoes on his feet. And so
yeah.
he stole shoes because he didn't know they were important shoes. He just needed shoes on his feet. And then he got scared when he heard the sirens and threw them over the side of the bridge, and that's when they fell on Stanley.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we've started talking about some of these themes already,
Yep.
but anyways, yeah. I looked up so we could just like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, go through the plot. I pulled together a 60 seconds or less summary of
We love to
holes.
see it.
So I'm going to read that and then I'll let you walk us through this a little bit. We'll go through the high points. Obviously, we've talked about some of those moments already a little bit. That way we can connect some of those dots a little. Okay, so Stanley Yelnats, which if you see that in text, you immediately know those are the names flipped. That's why his name is Stanley, and that's why everyone's name is Stanley in that family. They thought they were clever and they just kept doing it. Anyways, Stanley Yelnats, plagued by his family's generations old curse, gets wrongfully convicted and sent to Camp Green Lake, a brutal desert camp. There, under the scorching sun, the warden forces the boys to dig holes every day, supposedly for character building. Stanley befriends other campers and uncovers a dark secret. It all ties back to Stanley's family history and a hidden treasure, leading him on an adventure to break the curse. We also learn more about this dark secret and what that all came from. And there was like a whole storyline happening back in the past that led to why these boys are digging holes.
There's a great quote after, back in the past at Green Lake, after Sam has been killed, unfortunately. It literally stops raining at the camp. Obviously, if you hear Green Lake, you're like, how are they digging holes at this desert camp called Green Lake? It literally has never rained ever since they killed Sam. Probably the best quote that's from the book after Sam is dead, because a person sees them kissing and is, God's gonna punish you. That was a theme. And because Sam is a black man and the school teacher's a white woman, because this book also decides to tackle racism.
Enough for the juvenile detention system.
We're also going to talk about racism. Once he's murdered, they're going to hang him, they're going to lynch him, but they end up shooting and drowning him. A quote from the book is, "This all happened 110 years ago. Since then, not one drop of rain has fallen on Green Lake. You make the decision. Whom did God punish?" And I'm like, yeah, that line goes too hard for a children's book.
It does, but it also should.
The reason there's buried treasure at Camp Green Lake is because then the school teacher then decides to go on a vengeance murder spree, and she kisses only the men that she's going to kill. So she shoots the sheriff dead and then kisses him. And then she becomes this huge outlaw that robs banks and runs around and has collected treasure for decades. And before she dies, she buries her treasure.
Sometimes good girls had enough.
Listen, I support women's rights and wrongs.
Yes.
100%. Right? And so then the man who ended up shooting Sam, he's the one who owned the town and the lake dried up. That's another thing that's a little bit different in the book. He finds Kate when she's an old woman and has buried her treasure. He forces her to take him to her treasure, whereas in the movie, she makes herself be bitten by a yellow spotted lizard and dies. That's different in the book because that would take too much time, so they crunched it, which I liked more, honestly. There's buried treasure from an outlaw running around, and the warden is the great granddaughter of the man who owned the lake, and that's why they're digging holes. That TikTok sound. I'm tired of this, Grandpa. That's too damn bad. That's where that came from.
Yeah. When that happened, I was like, oh, okay. There it is. There it is.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there's some interesting things about generational mindset as well. Stanley wasn't a bad kid, but he wasn't really a good, like, wasn't great. Right. They all would talk about themselves as we just are down on our luck, and very victim mindset of just we aren't, bad things just happen to us. We're the ones always in need of help. We're the ones that like very much and then
we're unlucky because of our no good pig stealing great grandfather.
Yeah. And that's just the way it's going to be. I think the start towards the turning of the curse is when Stanley decides that even though he's had it rough, he's going to go help someone. That's the first time I feel like he starts helping him with reading, but to really, that's not, it's cool and important, but it's also not, up to a certain point, wasn't causing him any harm or putting him out, really.
Zero had decided to help him dig his hole so that he would feel like he had more energy to teach him.
Yeah. So it was more of a trade versus leaving to go help Zero when he feels like Zero's basically gonna die in the desert, is very self-sacrificial and only gonna lead to trouble for him. And I think that is really interesting. Like, he decides that he's going to help someone, and I think there's a little bit of like, it's kind of in my mind, I'm like, I feel like maybe that's when we broke it. Yes, there's the whole he carried him up the mountain and they're descendants because this is a book and a movie and we do these magical things, but also Stanley decided to do something that no one in his family had decided to be. He decided to behave in a way that no one had really behaved in his family up to that point for generations.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty powerful.
I agree.
But yeah, it's crazy. There's buried treasure, there's curses, there's all these things going on. And then it's also really just about digging holes for the sake of holes at a certain point. And it's
digging holes to find buried treasure because that's what the warden is looking for.
The thing that was burned in my brain from when I was a kid and I saw this was the poison in the nail polish.
Yes.
That was seared into my mind. Can you really do that? That seems like good self-defense. Why aren't we all doing that?
It's only good when it's wet.
That's why we don't do it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sigourney Weaver ate that role.
There were some heavy hitters in this movie for as small as this movie was. And also Shia LaBeouf, though.
It was his first movie.
It was crazy. Who was the one kid, though, that I was like, everyone was either good to, yes, okay, couldn't remember his name, but everyone in this movie was either good to neutral, so they were either like actively good at their role or neutral in the way that they needed to be neutral, that it was like not distracting in any way. And then Twitch comes on and I'm like, oh dear Lord, Who are you
Yeah, he
related to?
wasn't.
Because that's
He
how
wasn't the best.
it was the like the little sound he made. I think it was what got me. The mannerisms and the speech I could get with, but it was the
Right.
like scream or something he did that
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
not quite enthusiastic enough, but timed weirdly. That
Yeah.
didn't seem like this is actually a person struggling. This is just a person pretending. And it was
Yeah.
weird. That one got me. They definitely try to do a lot in this, and I think it's interesting in that these things get planted in us as kids, even if we don't fully understand them.
Mm-hmm.
As adults, we barely understand these things, but like they're in this kid's book, they're brought up, but they're not really resolved. I do think that for better or worse, in this movie's case, it's trying to do a lot of it and it succeeds at doing it for the better. That there's these seeds of the right idea of these problems. Maybe don't be on that side of history. Like, don't. And I feel like maybe if we don't even fully understand it, there's some of these subliminal things that we pick up on. I feel like I've noticed, as I was talking earlier about discovering a mixtape from
Right.
2007, and I'm like, oh, that's why I thought and felt that way.
Yeah.
This song talks about this. I think that's why what you do is so important, helping kids find stories that encourage their minds in the right ways that are good for themselves, but also good for the world. I
Right.
think is
Right.
really important.
And I think that's becoming more of a thing. We're seeing more diverse children's books than we've seen ever. Everyone's getting their story told. One thing that we always say in library land is that books shouldn't just be a mirror to show you your life. Books should
Mhm.
also be a window or a door to show you someone else's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's such an important part of art and media, whether it's books or movies or TV shows. Being able to see yourself represented is so important, but also the impact that these can have on giving you empathy for a world bigger than you might encounter in your daily life, because you're going to vote on issues that you're probably not going to encounter in your
Right,
town of however many people, but
right.
you're going to vote affecting other people, and having empathy and some understanding for those people that are living a different experience than ourselves. I like that this book and movie had so many different kinds of boys.
Yeah,
I think that was done really well, because what could have happened is we could have put the same type of boy that everyone assumes is going to be at the detention center.
right.
They're all so different with their personalities, body types, backgrounds, and
Mhm.
reasons for being there. And it's just, I think that's important too, that kids see that it's everyone, but also see that everyone has a story and the reason. I loved what you said, that it should be a window or a door. That's a really good way to put it. These, and I think that's what I hope these conversations that we have on this show end up being for people, because not everyone is always as attuned to what the empathy message is trying to say,
Right.
and trying to connect those dots and help make explicit the implicit for some people so that they can walk it all the way out and maybe start to see those things more themselves and be not just kinder to other people, but also kinder to themselves. Because I think that's important part of empathy, is also having some empathy for yourself too. Um,
Absolutely.
I love that windows and doors thing. I'm definitely going to steal it for sure.
Please do. It's an
Yeah,
excellent.
I think it's good to know that just because we can't I think this movie doesn't fix anything, it brings it up for us. And just because we don't know what to do or how to totally fix it, or aren't capable of totally fixing it,
Mhm.
doesn't mean we can't have a positive impact on either the problem or people affected by the problem
Yep.
in some way. And that still matters. Like, I think that's pretty important, like, takeaway of some of these pieces, because a lot of people don't like to engage with things that don't resolve or don't have a clear thing. And I'll be honest with you, this one in particular didn't really speak to me personally.
Right.
So it's not something that I default to because of those reasons. And I do think it is a lot of it because of that kind of resolution feeling of things. I would say for me, it's probably more the now I have these big world problems on my brain and now my
Right.
brain doesn't know what to do with it rather than
Right.
the story resolving in a way that's tidy. But I think we shy away from a lot of those things, but I think we're both doing ourselves and other people a disservice when we do that, because the more that we can know about the world, the more we have a chance to find our specific thing that
Right.
we care about, that we're good at, that we can have an impact on. And then that's one more little pixel colored in of someone
Right.
helping in this area. Messy but good. Thanks for having this different kind of conversation with me.
Thanks again for joining us today. Congratulations, you made it to the end. If you did, I'm hoping that means that you like the show. And if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, and tell us a little bit about what you like about the show and what it means to you, and, maybe what your favorite episode is. I don't know. I say we, like there's we. It's just me, guys. But the royal we of the show would like to know what you think. So any feedback is appreciated, and we appreciate you listening today. And I think we said all we needed to say, really, in this episode. So I just hope that you're open to some people in your life and some stories that maybe you haven't heard before, and that you will hear those stories with kindness and act accordingly. And I hope you have a great rest of your week, and until next time.